Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video we have an excellent presentation by astrologer Denise Guajardo Springer titled Astrology and Somatic Neuropsychology, Practical Application in Consultation. If you are enjoying our content, please like and subscribe and join our growing community. And lastly, if you wish to view our current class, workshop and webinar offerings, please visit KeplerCollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
So Denise has a BA in neuropsychology from Stanford University. And of course, the subject today is on somatic neuropsychology and astrology. Denise is an archetypal astrologer and somatic experiencing practitioner. She studied astrology since 1991 and was a trainer at Apple Computer. She's written articles for the Mountain Astrologer and for OPA's Career Astrologer, and is an OPA member. Denise is passionate about teaching astrologers to integrate somatic neuropsychological skills to benefit clients and the astrologer. She specializes in somatic processing of archetypal paradox and developmental trauma. She guest teaches at Karen Hawkwood's Paradox School. She's disabled and mixed race. She supports the first BIPOC offerings at Somatic Experiencing International. We are very happy to have Denise here today to talk about a really interesting subject, astrology and somatic neuropsychology, and how to use some of these topics in the consultation room. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Denise.
Thanks, Lori. Great to be here, everybody. So glad for your interest in this topic. So this is going to be a talk in two parts. Part one will be autonomic nervous system basics that will help you to understand a little bit about the autonomic nervous system and why we might want to attend to it. And part two will be tips for trauma-sensitive astrology readings. So part one, autonomic nervous system basics. So I'd like to start off with the definition of trauma. It's really critical to understand that trauma is not what happens, it's how the nervous system responds to what happens. So that presents an interesting conundrum for astrologers, since we want to oftentimes to predict things in the birth chart, but really we should come more from a perspective of what the client's experience was, and maybe using the chart to look at that. So trauma would be anytime too much happens too fast, too soon. And so that the modifier of too much, or the two, is really about the person who's experiencing whatever's happening. Another description of trauma is when there's not enough of what's needed. This happens oftentimes in developmental trauma, where children may not be getting the attention or the reflection back or the communication or the facial connection that they need. And that can have actually very devastating consequences. Not enough of what's needed can also happen, say, in a car accident. If somebody doesn't have a supportive, attuned other with them there, either on the phone or with them personally, that can make something more traumatic than it might be otherwise. So we're really talking about anything that overwhelms the nervous system, and that leaves an imprint on our nervous system. So to reiterate, trauma is defined by the individual response, not by the events themselves. So one of the favorite quotes from Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, the modality that I practice, is that trauma is a fact of life, but it does not, however, have to be a life sentence. So we're already kind of diving into the whole topic of trauma. So as a nod to our nervous systems, I would like everybody to take a moment to think of a beloved human or pet or inspirational figure, or possibly even nature, if those other beings aren't settling for your nervous system, and just take a moment to notice how your body feels when you call that person or pet or nature to mind, and just notice the effect that that might have on your nervous system or on your body. I'm going to take a moment to do it too. I have a beautiful oak tree outside my window here that I use often to look at for this purpose. And when I look at it, I feel a bit of lightning, and then also a kind of a movement downward, like I can feel my body in the chair. So we don't have the capacity to talk about what everybody's experiencing here, but I hope that this is something that feels good to you. I'm going to be mentioning somatic experiencing a lot because it is the modality I practice, and I think it's a particularly powerful one. And it has a special connection for astrologers in that it's one of the very few accepted modalities in the mental health space for which astrologers can train. Most of the other major modalities like EMDR and others require a person to be a licensed mental health practitioner. And somatic experiencing training, anybody can take it who works with humans, basically. And I think that that was a brilliant choice on Peter Levine's part. And I've spoken with him about it, and he's quite supportive of astrology as a modality. So astrology and the trauma healing continuum. So there's a range of things that can be done with astrology and trauma healing. And so what I'm presenting today is one end, which is trying to make consultations as gentle on the nervous system of the astrologer and the client as possible. And this can help, as an astrologer, this can help you from being secondarily traumatized by the traumatic material that your clients might present to you. So that's really a thing and very important. And then on the other end of the continuum is the work that I've developed, which is actively renegotiating trauma represented by the archetypal paradoxes in our birth charts or planetary placements. And this is very powerful, and it does require specific training, especially the somatic experiencing training. And I know people use other modalities as well. And the difference is that with somatic experiencing, we learn to develop the capacity to have a deeper and deeper and more powerful and detailed felt sense, a deeper experience of our somatic sense and what is happening in our body. And it's a very much a developed skill, because if we just try to just charge right in there and get into that material, our body holds all the information about all the trauma and everything that's ever happened to us. And so we need skills and tools to learn how to approach that material. We can't just go diving into it because that would actually be re-traumatizing. Another part of the trauma healing continuum is that the more work you do on healing your own trauma, the more regulated your nervous system will be, the more resilient your nervous system will be. And that will allow your clients, whether they know it or not, to co-regulate with you. We pick up all kinds of signals, subtle and not subtle, that let us know whether somebody's nervous system is regulated or not. So being in the presence of someone who has a regulated nervous system and who's trained to co-regulate is a very powerful thing. Okay, so I already covered this material. Let's see if there's anything I missed. So one thing I'll add is this last bullet point, is that we can have incredibly powerful somatic conversations between archetypes in the birth chart. And this is work that I'm particularly passionate about, and I do it in my private practice. I can't really teach people how to do it because it really requires that deeper training. The somatic experiencing training is a 3-year training, including case consultations and private sessions, personal sessions as well. So it's pretty powerful work. Okay, autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, as it's conceived of by most people now, has 3 main parts. And I want to emphasize that all these parts are incredibly valuable. One of the things I like about SE is that it really has a deep amount of respect for how our nervous systems have coped with everything that we might have encountered in our lives. And so that very finely tuned, honed over time nervous system functionality is something that we don't want to go in and muck around with without knowing what we're doing, because it's all there and has all developed for a reason. So the three main parts of the autonomic nervous system are the sympathetic, which is the arousal, fight or flight, otherwise known as activation part in the nervous system. This is the nervous system that moves us, that motivates us to fight or to flee, to take action, to move in space in some way. Another part of the nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. This part of the nervous system is responsible for freeze and shutdown. It's incredibly important. Many of us have faced situations in our lives where it would not be safe to fight or to flee. And so the best response is to freeze or to shut down. And that can be life-saving. So once again, respecting all these different parts and functions in the nervous system. And then one of the most exciting parts of the nervous system is the ventral vagus nerve. And this is responsible for social behaviors, and it regulates the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system and it creates mixed states where both ventral vagus and either sympathetic or parasympathetic are online at the same time. And it takes the states of fight or flight or freeze and shut down and turns them into things that are really positive and healthy. Oh, so I'm just noticing a question. Thank you for that, Andres. Andres is asking how astrology and somatic experiencing has brought healing into my own life. Probably my best example is around about the time of my just preceding my Saturn return. I have a natal square between Neptune and Saturn in my birth chart, and Neptune's in the earlier degrees and Saturn's slightly later degrees. So when I came up to my second Saturn return, Saturn first squared Neptune and then went on to conjunct Saturn and continuing in that square with Neptune. So it was really working with my capacity to move in and out of those Neptunian states. And I worked with, I had some very profound experiences in those Neptunian states, but they were followed by a deep, deep yearning that would persist for days and days afterwards. And it was really, really difficult. And during that transit of Saturn, I used these somatic principles to integrate with my body. My body basically began the integration process of this square and figuring out how that the unintegratable could be integrated. And it's never all done. It's never a finished process. However, it really catapulted me forward and has allowed me to really get the best out of that square and to harness all the energy that's locked up in it. So I hope that answers the question. So here's a picture of the autonomic nervous system, showing the sympathetic on one side and the parasympathetic on the other. And basically the reason I have this slide up here is to show the types of functions of our bodies that the autonomic nervous system is responsible for. The sympathetic will make our eyes dry when it's turned on, and the parasympathetic will have more fluid and lubrication. Same with saliva flow. In the sympathetic, we tend to have dry mouth, and when the parasympathetic is on, then saliva flows more easily. So it affects all of our organs, and this has profound implications for our health. The more regulated our autonomic nervous system is, the more our organs are functioning optimally. So there has been a study done some years ago that shows a dose response ratio, not just a correlation, but a dose response ratio between adverse childhood experiences and chronic illness later in life. And while it hasn't, I don't think it's been scientifically proven, but this is the mechanism for why that happens. If our nervous system isn't in appropriate balance, it restricts the functioning of our organs and creates illness. So here's another look at the autonomic nervous system. This perspective comes from polyvagal theory, which has been advanced by a brilliant scientist named Stephen Porges. If you are a particularly scientific type and love to geek out on science and neurobiology, I highly recommend his book, and I have the resource listed at the end on one of the last few slides. His polyvagal theory is amazing. He has over 250 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles to his name, for those of you who value that as a measure of scientific prowess. So here at the bottom, you'll see the 3 different parts of the autonomic nervous system. You'll see the ventral vagus, green, which is an indication of safety. It facilitates social engagement with special pathways to the viscera, the organs below the diaphragm. Then the red is the dorsal vagus, which is when there's life threat and we shut down because it's not safe to do anything else. And listed here I have freeze is a combination of the sympathetic and the dorsal vagus, and intimacy, which is a combination of the dorsal vagus and the ventral vagus. Then we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for fight or flight, as I mentioned before. And then if we have the sympathetic nervous system in combination with stimulation of the ventral vagus, we get things like play and joy. So this is another reason why we don't want to be thinking of the dorsal vagus or the sympathetic as being negative, because they exist in these hybrid states that are particularly associated with health and well-being. So I see a question here. Does regulated equal parasympathetic? No, regulated does not equal parasympathetic. What we really want is we want the appropriate nervous system response to the situation at hand. And so parasympathetic can be regulated or not regulated. Parasympathetic, if it slams on hard, is freeze and shut down. Parasympathetic, when it's applied gently, then brings in this component of the ventral vagus, which is profoundly regulating. So if I had to associate anything with regulated, I would say it's the ventral vagus. So Lynn asks if I have a day or night chart. I am a day chart, just barely, but not on the cusp. Yeah. So Chris asks, can you take a moment to explain why intimacy activates the dorsal vagus system? Why would it activate a life threat response? Oh, that's a really good question. I really didn't think of that in terms of how I labeled this. The dorsal vagus, when it exists on its own, especially if it's slammed on hard, it is responsible for life threat. When it's combined with the safety of the ventral vagus, that's when we get the intimacy. So yeah, that's kind of an adjustment to that. Thanks for that question. That's a good one. Judy asked, can you clarify how intimacy is connected to freeze? Play is clearer. So how intimacy is connected to freeze, the dorsal vagus is responsible for immobilization, for stillness. And so there are different types of stillness. There's a stillness that's frozen that has a tremendous amount of activation underneath it, a tremendous amount of sympathetic charge underneath it. And then there's stillness with safety. And stillness with safety is responsible for a very important behavior that we see in babies, and then also as adults, we hope to continue to see it, and that is molding, where a mother and child will maximize the contact, or parent and child, or caregiver and child will maximize the amount of contact, skin to skin or body to body, by molding the shape of their body to each other. And this is very characteristic of the combination of the ventral vagus with the dorsal vagus. So I hope that helps you understand how intimacy is connected with freeze. What is archetypal paradox? Well, let's see. My close colleague, Karen Hawkwood, is responsible for that nomenclature. And basically it has to do with when archetypes have different needs and wants and they're in conflict. And so we have these archetypes that are symbolized by various configurations in our birth chart. And sometimes we have archetypes that are very strong in our chart, but they don't get along with each other. And so they're both part of us, but they want different things. And so just like my my Saturn-Neptune square, Saturn and Neptune want different things. And so there's a paradox there that we can explore resolving. And I really direct you to Karen's work for if you'd like more information about that. What is the name of the book and author? The name of the book is The Polyvagal Theory, and the author is Stephen, with a PH, Porges, Porges. And the last slide in this presentation will have that information. Okay. Paula asked, is inertia, which often comes in the face of procrastination, connected with the dorsal system? Yes. Like falling asleep when you're supposed to complete a difficult task. Indeed. And what I've noticed is that with significant people in my life who've had issues with procrastination, and I've noticed it in myself as well, is that the task at hand feels overwhelming. And so our system is in some level of shutdown until we get closer to the deadline. And then our sympathetic nervous system ramps up and pushes us out of procrastination into getting things done. And so the idea with working with this would be to, with somatic experiencing, we'd use tools that are called pendulation and titration, which I may or may not get into today, just for issues of time. We would explore how to approach whatever the topic is in little tiny bits, so that it isn't overwhelming to our nervous system, and then take a break. Maybe go outside in nature, or listen to some music that's soothing, or talk with a friend, and then go back and do a little bit. And little bits are less overwhelming to the nervous system. Does parasympathetic support the adrenals, especially if a person has Addison's disease? So regulation is supportive of all the organ systems. So a regulated parasympathetic state is very supportive to all the organ systems. And one of my favorite teachers mentions that with this kind of work, most health conditions show improvement. Some are completely addressed, especially the younger a person is, because younger nervous systems are typically more resilient. But guarantee of a cure is not a thing that's possible to say, but oftentimes people will end up with lower doses of medications and less need for less treatment when their nervous system comes into more regulation. Okay, so I'm going to take a break from questions. So I can continue with the slides, and I'll get back to questions again later. So here's another diagram of moving from social engagement into fight or flight, and then into freeze, and then back down into from deactivation into social engagement again. So a resilient autonomic nervous system responds to what is happening in the moment. A resilient autonomic nervous system is coherent. So coherent applies on many different levels here. A coherent response is a response that's appropriate to the situation. It's not too much nor too little. It also, a coherent response feels good in the body. So coherence happens on many levels. Flow is another aspect of a resilient autonomic nervous system. It's able to move from one state to the next in a flowing manner. It's not extreme, although it can be extreme in extreme circumstances. Like, for example, like a parent lifting, a small parent lifting a car off a child in order to rescue it. That is an incredibly powerful sympathetic response that is necessary and appropriate to be very, very intense. So that is a coherent response in that situation. A resilient autonomic nervous system also typically shows a reciprocal relationship between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. When one increases, the other decreases, and vice versa. Many of us with severe developmental trauma will have all kinds of variations on this theme. For example, my nervous system used to have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic both on almost all the time. And that is not the reciprocal relationship that we want to see. Now, after years of work, my system is able to move in a more reciprocal fashion. So settling is one form of autonomic nervous system regulation. And so I'm present an exercise for you to experience, hopefully, if your nervous system can find it through this exercise. It's called orienting. So first I'll describe mammalian orienting. If you envision like a herd of deer, they're just hanging out in a state of relaxed alertness, and a twig snaps or a sound is made somewhere, and some or maybe all of the deer will then move their heads, which is orienting, toward that sound. And what they're doing is they're trying to ascertain whether there's a threat in the direction of the sound, coming from the direction of the sound. And once they visually and with their somatic experience determine that there's not a threat, then their systems let go and come back to grazing or whatever it is that they were doing. So we as mammals also have the capacity to orient and to experience a settling and return to more regulation. We just have to do it in a slightly different way because we're used to overriding our somatic experience. So for this exercise, what I invite you to do, if you feel comfortable doing it, is to allow your eyes to go where they want to go and let your head and neck follow. And we usually do this slowly. I'll demonstrate. So I'm letting my eyes go. They're going to my right. It'll look like your left. And so I'm just letting my head and neck follow the direction of my eyes. And my chair is swiveling, like my body's really wanting to move in that direction. And now I'm resting my gaze, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 feet away. And then just I'm waiting and noticing. I feel some tingling in the side of my back. A little bit of settling. There's a little bit of, I can also feel some tension in my belly because I'm presenting right now. And now I'm gonna let my eyes move again and my head and neck follow. So I won't go through the tracking of what my eyes are settling on, but I invite you to do the same thing. Let your eyes go where they want to go and let your head and neck follow. And notice what happens in your body. What sensations do you notice? And if perchance when you're noticing sensations, it feels in any way overwhelming, please come back out and look at something pleasant in your space or your room. It's always these exercises are always an invitation, never a requirement. So I'll give you another minute or two to experience that. So if this is something that felt settling to you, you might come back to this whenever you think of it during your workday or in the middle of readings. It can be really powerful to help your clients to know that it's okay to look away from the screen. It's okay to look out the window. It's okay for you to look out the window for a moment or two. And it's okay for them to do that too. And that part of our ventral vagus nerve controls the muscles in our head and neck. And so part of what orienting does, and when we move our head and neck where our eyes want to go, is it's letting those muscles move. And that can bring in quite a bit of regulation. So this exercise is reminding the autonomic nervous system that it can find settling and safety, and it's helping build those neural pathways. So practicing this when you're not under stress is a really great idea for if it feels good to you and settling to you. What is activation of the sympathetic nervous system? It's a spike of nervous system activity in response to a strong emotional or physical reaction. Sometimes it's related to a trigger. It can feel out of control, or for some of us who we're sitting on a huge well of anger, sometimes it can just feel really preternaturally good to unleash it. Not exactly the healthiest thing in the world, but which is a bit of the conundrum sometimes with the sympathetic nervous system, is that it can create a positive feedback loop with negative consequences where we just get more and more spun up. This activation can look high energy or low energy. It can look like speaking fast, moving fast, or it can look very low energy and shut down. Many of us operate from activation without realizing it, and it can last moments or it can last a lifetime. So activation described usually has strong emotions, body sensations or movements, and impulses such as fight or flee. And associated states like fight might feel like aggravation or fault finding or criticism or anger, and flee might feel agitated or a need to get away or one's mind jumping around. Okay, so here's another little break for your nervous system. This I have listed in my resources. Someone very dear in the somatic experiencing community during COVID used his skills as a videographer to film 1 minute of the river that is near him each day. And these can be purchased for $15 for 365 river minutes. And this is an example of watching things that flow can help create a sense of flow inside our own systems. So here's a river minute, and please enjoy and also notice what's happening in your body. So maybe just take a few seconds to notice how your body's feeling after watching that river minute. So let's talk a little bit more about the ventral portion of the vagus nerve. Let's see, I'm going to need to speed through this. It's responsible for social engagement. This is the part of the autonomic nervous system that we'll lean on to approve our readings. It smooths the operation of all parts of the autonomic nervous system. It's responsible for relaxed alertness, deep rhythmic breathing, safety, calm, pleasure. And it's associated with the striate muscles in the face, the muscles of the inner ear, the heart, the neck. So now let's get to part 2, tips for giving trauma-sensitive astrology readings. So I want to point out that I've noticed in reading Liz Green that my books are bursting with flags marking the places that she suggests somatic processing of archetypal issues. I'm not sure if she was suggesting Jungian analysis or some other somatic technique. She doesn't specify. I do know that I personally experienced powerful advances in the somatic resolution of archetypal paradox in my birth chart. So rule number 1, be aware of the human being you're reading for. Bring conscious awareness to how your client is responding. Notice and respond to their behaviors, their movements, their voice quality. Notice and respond to their affect, their facial expression, their demeanor. And take at least a brief look at your synastry and composite with your client. We're astrologers. We have these really, really powerful tools. Be sure to use them. Notice whether you are having a destabilizing influence on your chart or on your client, or where you might be having a very nurturing and positive effect. And use those capacities and those connections for yours and your client's benefit. Adjust your speed. If their energy is low, be a bit more energized than they are, if you can, if you have the capacity to do that. And if their energy is high, like they're speaking really fast, they're moving around a lot, meet them where they are, but be just a little bit less energized than they are. So what that does is it takes advantage of the fact that our nervous systems pick up signals from each other, and we can move someone more toward the midline just by adjusting our own behaviors. Preference faces over charts. And I neglected to mention this earlier on in the presentation, but I highly recommend letting clients know that they can on Zoom at least, that they can adjust the size of your face as compared to the chart. And they can do that on the fly anytime during the reading, just by moving the slider bar. Just by moving the slider bar between your face and the screen share. Another way to do this is just don't share the chart so often, but letting them know that the slider bar is there is really helpful, because we often will forget that we're screen sharing. So for most people, faces are a very regulating influence. There are some of us, myself in the past, where faces were not regulating influences at all. And it was only with a lot of work and healing that faces are now regulating for me. So I always want to include outliers, nervous system outliers, because I was one of them, and I know what it's like to not have my nervous system tended to. So please don't ever assume that any of these rules are hard and fast, because nervous systems are vary tremendously. So let's see, next slide. Vocal prosody. My vocal prosody isn't at its best today because I'm recovering from a sinus infection, but prosody is the sing-song quality of voice that we use when speaking with pets and babies. You don't have to speak to your client like a pet or a baby, because that might feel a little bit demeaning, but you can aim to increase your prosody in client sessions. So that's the sort of the rise and fall of your voice, the highs and the lows of your voice. And this is usually highly regulating to people's nervous systems. It's a potent source of ventral vagus input and regulation. And this actually extends outside the reading to listening to voices that have prosody and listening to music that has prosody. It's highly regulating. Spend much more time on the good news. Sandwich challenging information between good news. Be sure to give trines and sextiles their time. Sextiles are especially great because client agency produces results, and that produces a beautiful positive feedback loop for your client when they can really take advantage of something like that. Please don't dive into challenging material in an attempt to create a deep and powerful reading. Catharsis is now known to be profoundly dysregulating, and it might feel good afterwards, but it's profoundly unhealthy. It floods the body with endorphins to blunt pain, and it creates an addictive pattern. It's just really not healthy for the nervous system. So we really encourage you to make your readings much more gentle whenever you can. It doesn't mean you have to skip over the challenging stuff, but just don't spend too long there, or spend a little time there. Notice how your client's responding. And by responding, I'm not just saying their overt response, kind of like wanting more information, because sometimes clients can want more information because it's scary. And so their nervous system is holding on to the scary thing and wanting to know more about the threat in an attempt to avert it. But really, the nervous system would be much better served, and the person will be functioning at their highest capacity if you do a little bit of the challenging stuff and then do some of the stuff that's more regulating and more the news that people want to hear. And you can weave back and forth between those. Check in with your client. Ask how they're doing. Ask how it's landing for them. I know when I was a young astrologer just starting out, I felt like I needed to be dispensing information all the time. And now, over many decades of doing this work, I know that it's far more important to check in with my client and to allow them to speak and weigh in on what's happening, and for me to get their feedback so I can adjust the reading for them. Trauma is not a chart placement. Charts indicate a person's experience, but not necessarily the causal circumstances. please, please, please don't limit possibilities for healing by attributing nervous system driven behaviors to the birth chart. I can't emphasize this enough. You know, people could have told me with my Mars and Leo at the focal point of a T-square that, of course, I was angry and rageful, but I'm not angry and rageful now. I mean, anger comes up, but it doesn't take me over the way it did when my nervous system was really dysregulated. So I beg you, please don't limit your client's possibilities by attributing behaviors to the birth chart. Be very cautious with that. Okay, so I'm going to tell a little bit about somatic experiencing in the SE training, but before that, I want to get to some more questions. Aren't intimacy and play also trauma responses? Yes, intimacy and play can be trauma responses. So the behavior itself doesn't necessarily tell the entire story. We want to be noticing what the nervous system is doing actually underneath that, because placating and I'm forgetting the other names that people have for it. People are using lots of different names for the complex social behaviors that people use in order to try to create safety in a threatening situation. How is heart rate variability connected with these components of the autonomic nervous system? When heart rate variability is good, what components are working well? Heart rate variability is good when there's lots of ventral vagus stimulation. And by the way, the reference, Stephen Porges, who wrote the polyvagal theory, he's responsible for introducing the entire concept and measurement of heart rate variability. That is his work. That is just one part of his work. Yeah. Would you say procrastination is in fact an unconscious need to require a cortisol rush to proceed past a block, as in your example? I would say it's a functioning, yes, it's a functioning of the nervous system in order to try to reduce the stimulation. Because whatever the thing is that one is attempting or needs to do is overwhelming. And then, yes, the cortisol rush helps proceed past that. But really, we want to have healthier ways to accomplish that. And titration and pendulation, which I described before without those terms, but where we sort of engage with the material and then engage with something that's regulating, engage with a thing that we're procrastinating about, and then engaging with something regulating. A little bit of back and forth like that could be helpful. And Darlene asks if meditation is something that balances the nervous system. So there's a book on this topic called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness by David Treleaven. Treleaven. Meditation can be profoundly dysregulating, actually. And many people who get a meditation high are having a meditation high because they're coming into contact with trauma held in their body, and it's overwhelming to them, and their body then shuts them down with a flood of endorphins. And it makes a person feel like they're very spiritual because nothing bothers them, but really they're setting up an addictive pattern of repeating this over and over again. And so bringing in somatic experiencing tools into meditation practice can be profoundly effective. As a matter of fact, Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, was friends with, oh shoot, I'm going to forget the name of the man who is in leadership position at Spirit Rock. And so all the Spirit Rock mindfulness meditation teachers for a period of time were required to take the first year of the somatic experiencing training so that people would understand this. Unfortunately, whether people really understood it or apply it or not is catch as catch can. What healing modalities do you recommend specifically for folks living life more sympathetically? This question is from Shira. I recommend somatic experiencing. It totally changed my life after nothing else worked. I did EMDR, I did cognitive therapies, I did talk therapy. And when I found somatic experiencing, it just absolutely changed my life. And the career that I have now is something that I never had before in my life. I went from job to job, relationship to relationship. And I have somatic experiencing to thank for that. Suraj asks, connection nervous system to catching money abundance. Oh, what is the connection between the nervous system to catching money abundance? Well, money usually comes to us through people. And if we're more regulated in our nervous system, we're more comfortable co-regulating with other people. And that just makes life better. And when life is better and when you feel better, things tend to flow. So that's what I would say to that. Amelia asked, are these techniques helpful for people with fibromyalgia? Yes, absolutely. Yes, definitely. Core asks, the flow watching, can it also be a man-made water feature that moves water? Yes, definitely. Definitely, if it has that sense of flow. I have some prayer flags hanging outside, and I like watching them moving in the breeze. So that's another example of flow. And then even before somatic experiencing, somehow my system figured out that watching trees moving in the breeze was a very regulating experience for me. It helped calm me down. Okay, so somatic experiencing in the SE training. The reason I talk about this is because, once again, it is one of the only major trauma healing modalities that will train astrologers. You won't be in a room filled with astrologers unless you get all your friends and colleagues to sign up with you. And I am happy to provide support to people because I'm passionate about integrating the two. The training is 3 years long. It includes case consultations and personal sessions. You can take a 3 to 6 hour long SE basics, and that costs approximately $50. And then you'll get a deeper experience from a somatic experiencing faculty member they're incredibly good at being able to help people experience SE. The first year of the SE training will add a lot to your practice and your own well-being and knowledge. So even if you don't want to pursue the entire thing, you could just take the first year. Most major trauma healing modalities, EMDR, sensory motor, psychotherapy, will only train licensed mental health practitioners. SE is unique in offering training to anyone who works with people. And as I mentioned before, Peter Levine acknowledges the power of astrology. So here I have resources for you. Twig's River Minutes, the Somatic Experiencing website for learning more about the training, and a directory for finding practitioners. Peter Levine's own website, which is separate from the traumahealing.org website, because he has his own organization. He is older now, and if you have the resources, unfortunately, it's still somewhat resource limited. There are scholarships, I believe, for people of color and maybe marginalized populations. But it is possible to find opportunities to work with Peter, and I highly recommend it if you can. And then Peter's book, In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness. Really powerful in my experience. More resources. Here's the polyvagal theory, neurophysiological foundations of emotions, attachment, communication, self-regulation, by Stephen W. Porges. And then another book that I recommend is The Mind-Body Stress Reset. If you want a book that's going to give you exercises to do on your own this would be the one. Somatic Practices to Reduce Overwhelm and Increase Well-Being by Rebecca Ledine. And I particularly like this book because it helps you access increase your ventral vagal tone. And it does so in a very gentle, titrated way, so it's not likely to overwhelm your system. And then one resource that I don't have on here is that Peter Levine has 3 books that are either available as audiobooks or they come with an audio portion. So if you want guided exercises from him, this is how you can get them. So one of the books is called Trauma Healing. The other, I believe, is called Sexual Healing. And then there's another one called Freedom from Pain. So those are the resources I would recommend for that. Let's see. So does anybody have any more questions? I'm not monitoring the chat.
I lost my internet for a moment, so you might have answered some of these questions that I
did. I answered all of those, Lori, the 4 that are there.
Okay. Somebody did ask in chat about the $50. Let's see if I
Oh,
can
right.
find-
I'm just seeing that. So you can, for the $50 introductory, go to traumahealing.org. And what you're looking for is something that's called SE Basics. And actually, I'm going to correct that. Faculty members don't usually teach SE Basics. It's people who are on their way toward trying to become faculty member who teach that. There are people who have a tremendous amount of experience teaching SE Basics. And be prepared that they will allow you to apply, I think, the fee for SE Basics to the beginning 1 training. So and there'll be some sort of time frame for that. So let's see.
There's a couple of new questions here. Did you answer, Elsa, on the approximate cost of the 3 years?
No, it is expensive. It depends, the cost depends on whether you have to travel to get to a training. They are trying to have more trainings available for people with disabilities so that people with disabilities can train online, or for whatever situation that they have that doesn't allow them to travel. So I don't know what the cost is. That's something that you would have to look on the website, because I did my training some time ago. It's spendy. I would say somewhere in the realm of like $10,000 for 3 years. It's life-changing, though. It is absolutely life-changing, and I highly recommend it if you have the resources. It would seem to ask clients to keep their videos on. Often I do readings and clients don't have a camera on, so I could only judge from their voice. Would it help me to see them, or can I intuit hearing their voices alone? Core, I definitely recommend asking your clients to have their camera on if they feel comfortable doing that. If they don't feel comfortable, then it's going to cause them more stress to require them to have it on. And you can get a tremendous amount of information just from the quality of their voice and the tone of their voice. And also, if they don't have their video on, then I would emphasize even more being sure to check in with them, since you won't have that feedback.
Denise, there's a question that I think I might have moved over accidentally. It's about sharing your views of planet signatories of trauma. And Iman says, from my experience, Saturn and Mars aspects are indicators.
It really depends. And that's not really my specialty. Karen has really helped me to understand how much the moon is involved, especially with developmental trauma. So yeah, I'm sorry that that's not a question that I'm most qualified to answer. Is there benefit, Renee asks, is there benefit or advice on assisting clients with small pieces and titration into catharsis if they have low tone in the ANS and more free states? So I don't recommend ever going into catharsis. That's really not what we're going for. And when someone is in a free state, it really requires training to be able to help someone come out of a free state, because normally or typically when someone comes out of a free state, there is so much fight or flight energy out of that is associated with coming out of that state, that it can be really overwhelming for the client. So I think I wouldn't recommend that one does that without training. So Aman, I think we got to that question. Is that right, Lori?
Yeah. I just saw a message asking me to ask you, and then I found it and answered. So yes. And you can see the questions. Do you want me to feed you any more of them?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to.
There's a question about catharsis, which I think might be good for you to define what catharsis is.
Oh, okay. So any of these basically are, let's see, I think I'm going to take my slide down and follow my own advice. There we go. So catharsis is really going to be determined by the state of the nervous system that's experiencing whatever it's experiencing. And I would describe catharsis as something where there is a high amount of activation in the nervous system. Catharsis would be beating pillows or throwing. I've heard of people like throwing glass and breaking bottles. What else? It's a high amount of energy in the nervous system, and with somatic experiencing, we're really trying to help people with a gentler way of releasing. The word that we use in somatic experiencing is titration, and that's derived from chemistry, where in chemistry, if you mix a strong acid and a strong base together all at once, it creates an explosion. But if you add one drop at a time, you add a drop and it fizzles, and you add a drop and it fizzles. And that is how we work with traumatic material with somatic experiencing, is that fizzle is the body integrating the information that we processed. And has much more profound, powerful results over time than it does to create a big explosion. Big explosions are things that people like because they're dramatic, and we like drama. And it's like, oh, I had this really amazing session. It was so dramatic. But really, what's more healing is something that's quite a bit more gentle. Let's see.
So how do people get a reading with you, Denise?
I don't do readings. I work with clients long-term, and I'm still trying to beef up my skills to be able to work with people on the fly in order to do like a short amount of sessions to process some sort of archetypal paradox. So if somebody's interested, if you're interested in that, please reach out to me and we can see, we can discuss what might be possible, because that work is really near and dear to my heart, but it does require building up some skills in order to do it. So
did you answer Paula's question about Kundalini yoga and has exercises to tone the vagus nerve, sympathetic and parasympathetic and nervous system? And do you have any thoughts on this?
I have not done Kundalini yoga for a really long time, so I can't weigh in on that right now. I know that there are people who are somatic experiencing practitioners who combine it with yoga, and those would be the people to look for to ask that question. Someone asked if that I had understood that you had to be a certified practitioner of some kind to be in the SE program. You do not have to be a certified practitioner of some kind. You can sign up as an astrologer. You may have to navigate through the system a little bit, but you can sign up as an astrologer. You just basically need to have clients to work with. Someone asked if Peter's books come in hard copies. They do come in hard copies. So the hard copies come with a CD. So if you want the guided meditations, that's how it will come if you get a hard copy. And I highly recommend bookfinder.com if you don't know that resource. It's a great place to get used books, but you have to be sure that the CD is included. Let's see. Oh, well, thank you for all the props. I really, really appreciate it. Let's see. Are there any others I missed?
From Holly, would you give the reference again for information about meditation and trauma?
Oh, yes. So that is Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness by David Treleaven, Treleaven. So Lori, I forget, is my presentation going to be shared with the participants?
We do not share the slides, but because we share the replay, the slides, you can hit the pause button and take a screenshot. We just don't have any way to attach, like a slideshow to YouTube. They don't do that.
Okay, so hopefully
I'm not aware of that.
Everybody got that reference because I didn't have it in my slide. Any benefit or advice? Okay, so I already answered Renee's question.
So Rose Raw asks, where would you place autoimmune diseases with the ANS, like polyarthritis?
Oh, autoimmune diseases. Usually that's a system that we say is in global high intensity activation. And that is a system that is mainly on. It's mainly in sympathetic, or at least it has been for a long period of time. And then it may stay in global high where it's still like go, 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 fast, fast, fast. And then sometimes it wears the system down enough that then people are in freeze and have really, really low energy. So my experience of having chronic fatigue and Lyme disease and multiple sclerosis and a whole bunch of other diagnoses is that I would have energy dropouts where my fatigue would come in. And basically what I learned was that was a freeze state that was coming in because life felt too overwhelming for me. And what I had the privilege to do and what I learned to do was to honor that and rest. So along with doing somatic experiencing work, I was also paying attention to the signals that my body was sending me and heeding them. And sadly, we live in a world where not everybody has the privilege to be able to do that.
Okay, would you give some examples of what astrological indices would predispose to VV, DV, or any other disbalance in this field?
I just really haven't done that. I really haven't done that. Maybe there's somebody else who has, but there's something about somatic experiencing that it's a very different way of processing the world. That's why it takes some time to develop the skills, because we are everything in our environments is telling us to process with our intellect. And so making the shift to processing somatically is a profound shift, and it really changes a person. It's really changed me a lot. So I don't preference intellectual processing nearly as much as I did. And I actually find that my soma gives me wiser answers than my brain ever could. More succinct and wise. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Katie asks, do you think activation responses can be seen in specific chart markers like fight or flight kind of thing?
I really don't know the answer to that question. I know that's high on everybody's list, or a lot of people's list, but it's just not something that I have. I've not found it. Yeah, so I stopped looking.
Let's see. Caroline would like to know if you could explain how both systems can be on at the same time, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic.
Our nervous systems are incredibly flexible and adaptable, and I'm trying to think how they get there. I don't really know how they get there. My life circumstances from the time I was in the womb to the time I was born, I've had medical trauma, educational trauma, mentally ill parent. Yeah, I don't know. The nervous system just does the best it can to adjust. And I'm sorry, I don't have an example of how those two could come to be on at the same time. It's like the nervous system's trying to create some balance and trying to get some relief from being on all the time. And so it might put both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic on at the same time in an attempt to try to come to some kind of midline. But it's like driving with the gas and the brake on at the same time. It's like going to burn out your engine, and burn out your brakes. It's not a healthy way to go. So I hope that comes close to answering the question.
Yeah. In our kind of a list of the things that you were going to talk about today, one of the things that was mentioned was how to close an astrology reading. So do you have some ideas for how our participants could do that?
How to close an astrology reading. I would say with some connection with the person, really connecting with them, asking them how it went, or letting them know how much you appreciate their being a client, maybe re-emphasizing some of the sextiles and trines. Those would be the things that I would do. But really connecting with the person is going to give them a lot of regulation in their nervous system, if their nervous system has that capacity.
Okay. Yeah. Would you call somatic experiencing a body work modality?
There are body workers who take the somatic experiencing training, but it is not a body work modality. If you do take the training in the advanced year, you will be taught some hands-on techniques, but they're mainly just giving support to the body. So there's not any manipulation of the body involved, as much as it's just giving support to the kidney adrenals in an effort to help them learn how to stop pumping out cortisol, how to rest down. Yeah.
Okay. Alessandra asks, how can we not limit our clients' possibilities by attributing SNS behaviors in a client session?
I think just really coming with an attitude of openness for all the possibilities that are inherent in a birth chart or in any configuration that you're working with. Just and coming with an attitude of humility that people do amazing things, and we can't necessarily know that a particular configuration is dooming somebody to a particular thing. So really just trying to keep an open mind, learn from our clients as well about what their experience is. Sometimes if you talk with them, you'll help bring some gems to the surface that they already have figured out, but just may not be aware of that they figured out. So really engage with your clients and kind of let go of needing to be the expert. We have enough expertise. We don't have to, know it all.
Yeah. And this next question from June is asking about the relationship between chart placements and challenging experiences in life, and if it's harmful to suggest that a natal placement caused a challenging experience that led to trauma, which is really a philosophical view, right? Because everybody, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, so I have a lot of thoughts about this question, but I'm going to obviously hand this question to you, Denise. How do you discuss this in a trauma-informed way?
I think of it as a representation of a client's experience, that and holding that information loosely and unfolding it with the client about, and so it's a dialogue to unfold what we can set out as astrologers some of the range of what it might mean, but then it's in dialogue and conversation with the client that we come to understand what it means for them.
Yeah. And don't you think that it also relates to the astrologer's philosophy? Because I don't think all astrologers would say that a natal placement causes something to happen in life. So I think it's kind of like coming back to your own belief system and how you operate your own practice.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take these last two questions, or it looks like one question. And thank you, Denise, for staying and answering questions. So this one is from Catherine, who asks about the Saturn and Neptune in Aries in 2026, and if you have any ideas of how we can use this combination to help people at large, because the nervous system will likely be under a lot of stress.
Oh yeah, boy. Read Liz Green's Neptune book. I know. It's going to be right on my descendant, so I have my eye on it, and I'm thinking a lot about it. And I was going to say strange bedfellows, but they're really related, and they balance each other. And Saturn really helps ground what Neptune brings. And Neptune really helps expand the spiritual possibilities compared to Saturn's groundedness. So yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious about what it will bring. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have answered, or you have answered all of the questions, and you're getting lots of wonderful feedback in the chat box. I want to thank everyone for attending today for another one of our free webinars. Thank you, Denise, for presenting this, very thoughtful material and a bit of a different type of material for astrology. So it's nice to get different types of information. And we will have the replay posted for you. Usually Callum has it posted by the end of the week. And as soon as it's posted, I will include a link in the next KeplerCollege email. And you can always find it on our YouTube channel. And it's at YouTube, with our name, KeplerCollege. So hopefully you will be able to watch the replay by the end of the week and join us for another webinar in the future. So thank you again, Denise. Very much appreciate you being here. Thanks to all of you for being here. You got hearts and hand claps all flying up.
Thanks for the opportunity, for your attention. I never take that for granted. So thanks so much.
Yes. All right. We'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.